sun hung low in the sky as Mark steered his old Jeep down the winding road leading into Black Hill Forest. The dense trees loomed ahead, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, flipping through a tattered map, while Jake leaned against the back seat, staring at the blurred scenery outside. "I still don't get why we're coming here," Jake muttered. "There's a reason people don't hike this place." Olivia rolled her eyes. "It's just a forest, Jake. The legends are just to scare tourists away. And besides, this place is untouched, real wilderness. No crowds, no tourists." Mark smirked. "Just us and the trees." Jake exhaled. "Right, us and the trees. And whatever else lives out here. The town's warning." They stopped for gas at a small, run-down station on the outskirts of Brantford, the last town before the forest. An old man sat outside, rocking slowly in a creaky wooden chair. His sunken eyes followed them as they stepped out. "You kids headed up that way?" the old man asked, his voice raspy. Mark nodded, stuffing the gas pump into the car. "Yeah, just a weekend hike." The old man tapped a finger against his temple. "Folks don't go up there no more." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" The man sighed. "Been a few disappearances, hikers, campers. They go in, don't come out." Olivia scoffed. "People get lost all the time." The old man leaned forward. "They weren't lost. They were taken." A heavy silence settled over them. Mark forced a laugh. "Look, we appreciate the warning, but we'll be fine. We're experienced hikers." The old man shook his head, his gaze dark. "Doesn't matter how experienced you are. The hill, it changes things." Jake swallowed. "Changes things how?" The man simply said, "You'll see." They got back in the Jeep and pulled onto the road. No one spoke for a while. Then Olivia forced a smile. "Just a crazy old man. We'll be fine." Mark nodded. But Jake, staring at the thickening trees, couldn't shake the unease curling in his gut. Somewhere ahead, Black Hill was waiting. The road leading into Black Hill Forest was barely visible under the thick mist rolling through the trees. The sun had started its descent, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched unnaturally across the damp ground. Mark gripped the wheel tighter as his Jeep rumbled over the uneven dirt road. The closer they got to the trailhead, the heavier the silence became. Even Olivia, who had been excitedly flipping through her map earlier, now sat quietly, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the paper. Jake leaned forward from the back seat. "It's weird, right? How quiet it is." Mark nodded. "No birds, no wind." Olivia forced a laugh. "You guys are acting like this is a horror movie." Jake shrugged. "Feels like one." As if on cue, the Jeep's headlights cut through a sudden burst of fog, revealing the trail entrance. The sign was old and cracked, the words barely readable. "Black Hill Trail. Enter at your own risk." Jake scoffed, real welcoming. Mark killed the engine, and the three of them stepped out. The air was damp, thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. The fog had settled like a living thing, curling between the trees, shifting in unseen currents. Olivia checked her map. The main trail should loop around the hill. If we follow it, we'll reach the camping spot in a few hours. Mark hoisted his backpack. Then let's move before it gets dark. They stepped onto the path. Something feels wrong. The deeper they walked, the more unnatural the forest felt. The trees loomed higher than they had seemed from the road, their trunks twisting slightly, as if bending toward them. The fog thickened, muting their footsteps. Jake exhaled sharply. Okay, I know I sound paranoid, but does anyone else feel like we're being watched? Mark stopped walking. Yeah. Olivia scoffed but didn't argue. She was gripping her map a little too tightly. Then, a snap. A branch cracked somewhere in the distance. The three of them froze. Mark turned his head slowly. Nothing. Just fog and trees. Another snap. Closer. Probably an animal, Olivia whispered, but her voice wavered. Jake shook his head. No, that's footsteps. The air grew heavier, pressing against them like a thick, suffocating blanket. Mark swallowed. We need to keep moving. They picked up the pace. Minutes passed, then an hour. The sky darkened. Olivia stopped abruptly. Mark nearly ran into her. What's wrong? She turned, face pale. The trail. It's gone. Mark frowned and looked around. The dirt path they had been following was no longer there. What? Jake's voice cracked. That's not possible. They spun in circles, searching for any sign of the worn trail. But there was only forest. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction. The fog had grown impossibly thick, a swirling mass that distorted their surroundings. Mark's stomach twisted. How? We didn't take any turns. Olivia's hands trembled as she looked at her map. This doesn't make sense. We should be right on the trail. Jake let out a nervous laugh. Okay, no big deal. We backtrack. They turned around, but the path they had walked moments ago was gone. Just more trees, more fog. Jake cursed under his breath. Tell me this is a joke. Mark took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. It has to be the fog. It's messing with our perception. Olivia clutched her map like it was a lifeline. We should... A low, distant clicking sound cut through the silence. Click, click, click. Jake stiffened. What the hell was that? The sound was rhythmic, inhuman, like something was tapping against a tree bark. Olivia grabbed Mark's arm. I don't like this. Click, click, closer. Mark's heart pounded. The fog swirled ahead, shifting unnaturally. Something moved between the trees. A tall, distorted silhouette. It wasn't human. The silhouette in the fog didn't move. It stood there, too tall, too still. Mark's breath caught in his throat. Olivia tightened her grip on his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Jake swallowed hard. That's not a person. The clicking sound returned, slow and deliberate. Click, click, click. It echoed through the forest, bouncing off the trees. Then the figure shifted, not like a person stepping forward, more like a glitch. 1 second, standing near a tree. The next, suddenly closer. Olivia's sharp intake of breath was the only sound between them. Mark fought every instinct screaming at him to run. We have to go. Now. No one argued. They turned and ran. The desperate escape branches lashed at their faces as they sprinted through the undergrowth, slipping on damp leaves, dodging tree roots that threatened to trip them. The fog curled around their legs, thickening, trying to slow them down. Jake stumbled but caught himself. Where are we even going? Anywhere but here. Olivia gasped, her breath ragged. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. He dared a glance over his shoulder. The silhouette was gone, but the clicking remained. Closer. Click, click. Mark pushed forward, lungs burning. There, up ahead. Through the mist, a fallen tree trunk lay in their path, split by a lightning strike. They vaulted over it, one by one, using it as a barrier. Silence. They collapsed behind the tree, gasping for air. The fog hung thick and still, swallowing the trees ahead. Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead. Did we lose it? No one answered. Olivia clutched her knees, trying to steady her breath. What was that thing? Mark shook his head. I don't know, but He froze mid-sentence. There were footprints in the mud, huge clawed footprints, leading right up to the fallen tree, then stopping. Jake's face drained of color. It was just here. Mark's stomach turned. But where did it go? Single click sounded behind them. Mark turned, slow and stiff. Something hung upside down from a tree branch above them, watching, waiting. Its face was wrong, too smooth, too stretched. Its mouth curved upward into a smile that didn't belong. Mark felt his body go cold. The thing mimicked his voice perfectly. Run! Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. The thing hanging upside down moved. Not like an animal, not like a human, more like a puppet with its strings cut, limbs twisting at unnatural angles, its head cocked too far to the side. That horrible smile stretched too wide. And then it spoke again. Run, but it wasn't a command. It was an imitation. It was copying Mark. Jake shoved Mark hard. Move. The three of them bolted, crashing through the undergrowth. The clicking sound exploded behind them, rapid and erratic. Click, 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 click. Mark didn't dare look back. He didn't have to. He could feel it, right behind them, lost in the dark. They ran until their lungs burned, until their legs threatened to collapse. Only when the clicking finally faded into silence did they stop. Mark doubled over panting, Jake leaned against a tree, his hands on his knees. Olivia was shaking, eyes darting around the forest. "We need to find the road," Mark said between gasps. Jake nodded. "Agreed. Screw this hike. We're leaving." Olivia pulled out the map with trembling hands. "The problem is, I don't know where we are." Mark's stomach dropped. "What?" She turned the map toward them. "Look, the trail they had followed was missing. Gone, like it had never existed. The only thing surrounding them now was endless trees, stretching too far in every direction." Jake's voice was tight. "That's impossible." Olivia shook her head. "It should be right here, but it's not." Mark wiped sweat from his forehead, forcing himself to think. "There had to be a way back. We retrace our steps," he said. "Follow our footprints back to the trailhead." They turned. Their footprints were gone. Mark's pulse hammered. "That's not possible." The damp earth had been soft, muddy. Their footprints should have been there, but there was nothing, just untouched ground, like the forest had swallowed their path whole. Jake's breathing was uneven. "What the hell is happening?" No one answered, because they all knew. The forest didn't want them to leave, and the thing in the trees wasn't done with them yet. The sky had darkened, swallowed by thick storm clouds. The forest seemed alive, shifting around them in unnatural ways. Every tree looked the same. Every direction felt wrong, and the clicking had started again. Distant, faint, but there, following, watching. Mark wiped sweat from his forehead. "We need shelter." Jake, still out of breath, nodded. Before night falls, Olivia scanned the trees. There, through the mist, a dark shape loomed ahead, hidden among the trees, barely visible through the fog. A cabin. The sight of it sent a wave of relief through Mark's chest. "Let's go." But as they moved closer, relief turned to something colder. The cabin was old, rotting. The wood was splintered, the windows cracked, the porch half sunken into the earth. The door stood slightly open, as if someone had left in a hurry. A cold wind whistled through the trees. Mark hesitated. "What if someone's inside?" Jake exhaled. "Then we ask them for help." Olivia shook her head. "No one's lived here in years." Mark wanted to believe that, but something felt wrong. Still, standing in the open was worse. With a final glance toward the forest, toward the thing that might still be watching, he stepped inside. Inside the cabin, the interior smelled of damp wood and decay. Dust coated the floor. The furniture was old, covered in torn sheets. Jake swept his flashlight across the room. The dim beam revealed faded wallpaper, broken chairs, and a long dining table covered in claw marks. "Cozy," Jake muttered. Mark shut the door behind them. "At least it's shelter." Olivia moved cautiously, running her fingers over the walls. "Someone lived here once." Jake stopped near a bookshelf against the far wall. A single journal sat in the center, untouched by dust. His brow furrowed. Guys, this looks new. Mark and Olivia joined him. Jake picked up the leather-bound book, flipping it open. The handwriting inside was shaky, frantic. They watch from the trees. They never leave. They never let you leave. A chill ran down Mark's spine. Jake turned the page. I've seen its face. Now it knows me. Now it won't stop. A third page. There is no way out. Mark's breath felt trapped in his chest. Olivia took a slow step back. Who wrote this? Jake scanned the back cover. A name was scratched into the leather. Daniel Carter. Mark froze. He knew that name. Years ago, a hiker named Daniel Carter had gone missing in Black Hill Forest. They never found his body. Jake's face paled. No way. Olivia whispered. He never left. A bang came from outside. Mark's heart nearly stopped. Then the clicking returned. Right outside the cabin. Click, click, click. Something was at the door, watching, waiting. Click, click, click. The sound was slow, deliberate. Mark's stomach twisted as he turned toward the door. The rotten wood creaked under the weight of something standing just outside. Jake gripped the journal tighter. Olivia backed away until her shoulders hit the wall. A long, drawn-out exhale came from the other side of the door. Then, a knock. Soft, almost polite. Knock, knock, knock. Mark's breath hedged. No one moved. No one spoke. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Jake shook his head slowly. That's not a person. The air inside the cabin grew heavy, pressing against them like unseen hands. Olivia's fingers gripped the torn wallpaper. Mark swallowed hard. What do we do? Jake clenched his jaw. We stay quiet. The door handle turned. A slow, deliberate twist. Mark's heart pounded. There was no lock. Jake grabbed a rusted chair from the corner and jammed it under the handle. The wood groaned under the pressure, but it held. The thing outside went silent. Then, a new sound. Not clicking, not knocking, but laughter. Low, raspy, distorted. The hairs on Mark's arms stood on end. The laughter wasn't right. It sounded like it was trying to imitate something human, but failing. Then, in a perfect mimic of Olivia's voice, it whispered, "Let me in." Olivia choked on a scream, slapping a hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. Mark's blood turned to ice. He looked at Jake, who was frozen in shock. The thing outside pressed against the door. The wood bowed inward. It was getting impatient. Then, a new sound. A distant howl from deep in the forest. Low, mournful. The thing outside stopped. Silence. Then, footsteps retreating, fading into the night. They didn't move, didn't breathe, not until they were sure it was gone. Jake let out a shaky breath. It left. Mark didn't answer because he wasn't sure it had, and he had the sinking feeling they had only just begun to understand what was hunting them. 7 silence. Not even the wind stirred outside. The door remained intact, though the wood had bent under the creature's weight. The chair wedged against the handle trembled slightly, as if whatever had been outside had almost broken through. Mark wiped the sweat from his forehead. What the hell was that? Olivia's voice was unsteady. It spoke. It sounded like me. Jake was still gripping the journal with white knuckles. It mimics voices. He flipped through the pages, scanning the frantic, scrawled handwriting of Daniel Carter. His finger stopped on one passage. It knows your name. It uses your voice. Once it chooses you, it won't stop. Mark swallowed hard. That's what it did. It used Olivia's voice. Jake turned another page. This one had only 4 words, scratched so hard into the paper that the page had nearly torn. It marks you first. Something cold curled in Mark's stomach. Marked. Before Jake could respond, Olivia let out a sharp gasp. She was staring at the inside of her wrist. A thin, dark symbol had appeared just beneath her skin, like an ink stain that wouldn't wash away. Jake's face paled. That wasn't there before. Mark's breath came too fast. He yanked up his sleeve. His own wrist had the same mark. So did Jake. 3 identical inky black symbols. Olivia's hands started shaking. It marked us. Jake flipped to the next page in the journal. His eyes scanned the words, his lips parting in horror. After it marks you, it comes back, and next time, it doesn't knock. A loud thud hit the roof of the cabin. Boom! The ceiling shuddered. Dust rained down. Another thud. Closer. Heavier. Jake shut the journal with a snap. It's already here. Mark barely had time to react before a long, blackened hand slammed against the window. Fingers too long. Too many. Joints. Skin stretched too tight over knobby, inhuman bones. The thing hadn't left. It had never left. And now, it was coming in. Boom. The ceiling shuddered. Dust rained down from the rotting wooden beams. Mark clenched his jaw, backing away from the window, where the thing's hand still rested against the glass. Then, its fingers twitched. Scourge. The creature dragged its nails across the window pane, a slow, deliberate sound, like it wanted them to know it wasn't in a hurry. Jake grabbed Mark's arm. We have to go. Now. Olivia was already moving, yanking open a door at the back of the cabin. There's another way out. Boom. The thing slammed onto the roof again. The wooden beams creaked and bowed. Mark's pulse thundered. It's trying to break in. Jake grabbed the journal and bolted after Olivia. Mark was right behind them. The back door creaked open onto a narrow path leading into the woods. They didn't hesitate. They ran into the forest. Cold air burned Mark's lungs. The trees blurred past as he sprinted, branches clawing at his arms. Behind them, something heavy hit the ground. The roof had given way. The creature was inside the cabin. A guttural, hollow rasp echoed behind them. A sound that wasn't breathing, but something trying to mimic it. Then, click, 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 click. Mark's chest tightened. It was coming. Jake's flashlight flickered as they ran, barely illuminating the narrow path. Olivia stumbled, but kept moving. The clicking grew louder, and then a shape moved in the trees ahead. Mark skidded to a stop. Wait! Jake nearly slammed into him. What? Why are we stopping? Mark pointed. There was someone in the woods, not the creature. A man, thin, wild-eyed, filthy. His clothes were ragged, his hair unkempt, his skin streaked with dirt. But the worst part, his wrist had the same black mark. His gaze locked onto them. His voice was hoarse. You shouldn't have come here. A horrible, inhuman screech exploded from behind them. The creature was close. The man's eyes widened. Run. Mark didn't ask questions. They ran. That was worse. It meant it was hunting silently. The stranger suddenly ducked off the path, vanishing into the thick undergrowth. This way. Mark hesitated for half a second. They didn't know this man. They didn't know if he was dangerous. But behind them, branches snapped. The creature was right there. Mark didn't think. He followed. The hideout. They ran for what felt like forever before the stranger pulled them into a narrow cave, hidden beneath the tangled roots and fallen trees. The space was cramped, the air thick with the damp earth. The stranger pressed a finger to his lips. Don't move. Don't speak. Mark clenched his jaw, heart hammering. Then, shuffling, outside something moved. Slow, deliberate footsteps. The sound was wrong, like bare feet dragging over wet leaves. Jake's breathing was too fast. Olivia squeezed her eyes shut. The stranger barely moved. He was waiting. A long, hollow exhale came from just outside the cave entrance. The creature was right there. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, silence. The presence faded. The stranger didn't move for a long time. Then, finally, he exhaled. It's gone. For now. The truth about the Mark turned to the man, still catching his breath. Who the hell are you? The stranger's gaze was distant, haunted. Daniel, he said. Daniel Carter. Olivia's breath caught. Jake's hands tightened on the journal. Daniel Carter, the man who had disappeared years ago. You've been here this whole time? Mark asked. Daniel gave a hollow laugh. There is no here. There is no time. Once it marks you, you don't leave. Olivia shook her head. That's not true. We can still. Daniel grabbed her wrist. his fingers brushing over the blackened mark beneath her skin. "It doesn't just mark you," he whispered. "It's part of you now." Mark felt a cold dread creep over him. Daniel's voice dropped lower. "Have you heard it speak yet?" Mark didn't answer, but Olivia shivered. "It used my voice." Daniel closed his eyes, nodding. "That's how it starts." Jake swallowed. "Starts?" Daniel looked at them. "The mark means you belong to it now." The cave felt smaller, the air heavier. Daniel's voice was grim. "And the longer you stay in Black Hill, the less human you become." The stranger ran ahead of them, moving fast despite his ragged appearance. His bare feet barely made a sound against the damp earth. Mark, Jake, and Olivia followed, breathless and terrified. The creature was close. The clicking had stopped. That was worse. It meant it was hunting silently. The stranger suddenly ducked off the path, vanishing into the thick undergrowth. "This way." Mark hesitated for half a second. They didn't know this man. They didn't know if he was dangerous. But behind them, branches snapped. The creature was right there. Mark didn't think. He followed the hideout. They ran for what felt like forever before the stranger pulled them into a narrow cave, hidden beneath tangled roots and fallen trees. The space was cramped, the air thick with the damp earth. The stranger pressed a finger to his lips. "Don't move. Don't speak." Mark clenched his jaw, hard hammering. Then, shuffling, outside, something moved. Slow, deliberate footsteps. The sound was wrong, like bare feet dragging over wet leaves. Jake's breathing was too fast. Olivia squeezed her eyes shut. The stranger barely moved. He was waiting. A long, hollow exhale came from just outside the cave entrance. The creature was right there. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, silence. The presence faded. The stranger didn't move for a long time. Then, finally, he exhaled. "It's gone. For now." The truth about the Mark turned to the man, still catching his breath. "Who the hell are you?" The stranger's gaze was distant, haunted. "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Carter." Olivia's breath caught. Jake's hands tightened on the journal. Daniel Carter, the man who had disappeared years ago. "You've been here this whole time?" Mark asked. Daniel gave a hollow laugh. "There is no here. There is no time. Once it marks you, you don't leave." Olivia shook her head. "That's not true. We can still." Daniel grabbed her wrist, his fingers brushing over the blackened mark beneath her skin. "It doesn't just mark you," he whispered. "It's part of you now." Mark felt a cold dread creep over him. Daniel's voice dropped lower. "Have you heard it speak yet?" Mark didn't answer, but Olivia shivered. "It used my voice." Daniel closed his eyes, nodding. "That's how it starts." Jake swallowed. starts. Daniel looked at them. The mark means you belong to it now. The cave felt smaller, the air heavier. Daniel's voice was grim. And the longer you stay in Black Hill, the less human you become. Silence settled in the cave, thick and suffocating. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. Olivia and Jake sat frozen, their eyes locked on Daniel Carter, the man who had disappeared years ago and was now telling them that they wouldn't leave this place either. Olivia shook her head. No, we're getting out of here. We have a car. Daniel's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist again. His fingers trembled. You don't understand. He turned her arm, exposing the inky black mark that had appeared hours ago. Mark's breath caught. It had changed. The edges had spread, veins of darkness creeping up her arm, like something growing beneath her skin. Jake pushed back against the cave wall, his breath uneven. What the hell is happening? Daniel let go of Olivia and held out his own arm. His mark wasn't just on his wrist, it covered half of his arm. Black veins twisted and pulsed beneath his skin, branching toward his shoulder. Olivia stared in horror. What is that? Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. It's not a mark. It's an infection. A cold dread coiled in Mark's stomach. Infection. Daniel's gaze was haunted. It doesn't just take your body, it takes your mind. The longer you're in Black Hill, the less you remember who you are. Jake shook his head. No, that's not. He yanked up his sleeve, checking his own mark. It had spread too. Panic flickered in his eyes. Daniel's voice grew urgent. You still have time, but not much. Mark swallowed. How do we stop it? Daniel's silence was the worst part, because there was no answer. Then, Olivia gasped. Her fingers twitched. Not normally. They moved, too long, too sharp, curling in a way fingers shouldn't. She jerked away from the others, gripping her hand, like she could force it back to normal. No. Daniel's voice was firm. It's starting. Mark's stomach twisted. They weren't just being hunted. They were becoming the thing that hunted them. Olivia's breathing grew ragged as she clenched her trembling fingers. The unnatural movement in her hand wasn't stopping. Mark grabbed her shoulders. We're going to fix this. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. How? It's inside me, Mark. I can feel it. Jake backed away, staring at his own arm, at the black tendrils creeping up his veins. We don't have time. We need to go. Now. Daniel blocked at the exit. You don't get it. Running doesn't help. Mark's jaw tightened. Then what does? Daniel exhaled shakily. His haunted eyes flicked to Olivia's trembling hand. Once the change starts, you have two options. The silence in the cave was suffocating. You fight it, or you let it take you. Jake's voice was tense. What the hell does that mean? Daniel's gaze darkened. I've seen people try to run. The infection catches up. It gets worse. Their minds stop being theirs. Mark swallowed hard. And the ones who fight, Daniel's silence said everything. Then Olivia let out a sharp gasp. Mark turned, and his stomach dropped. Her fingernails were turning black. Not just black, elongating, curving, like claws. Jake swore under his breath. We have to do something. A new sound filled the cave. A distant, echoing click. Mark's blood turned cold. Daniel tensed. It knows the creature was coming, and it knew one of them was changing. We have to move, Daniel said, before it decides she's one of its own. Mark's breath came too fast. There was no way back. They had to run. But where? And for how long? Because the mark was spreading. And soon, they wouldn't be running from the creature. They'd be running from themselves. Olivia's breathing grew ragged as she clenched her trembling fingers. The unnatural movement in her hand wasn't stopping. Mark grabbed her shoulders. We're going to fix this. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. How? It's inside me, Mark. I can feel it. Jake backed away, staring at his own arm, at the black tendrils creeping up his veins. We don't have time. We need to go. Now. Daniel blocked the exit. You don't get it. Running doesn't help. Mark's jaw tightened. Then what does? Daniel exhaled shakily. His haunted eyes flicked to Olivia's trembling hand. Once the change starts, you have two options. The silence in the cave was suffocating. You fight it, or you let it take you. Jake's voice was tense. What the hell does that mean? Daniel's gaze darkened. I've seen people try to run. The infection catches up. It gets worse. Their minds stop being theirs. Mark swallowed hard. And the ones who fight. Daniel's silence said everything. Then Olivia let out a sharp gasp. Mark turned, and his stomach dropped. Her fingernails were turning black. Not just black, elongating, curving, like claws. Jake swore under his breath. We have to do something. A new sound filled the cave. A distant, echoing click. Mark's blood turned cold. Daniel tensed. It knows the creature was coming, and it knew one of them was changing. We have to move, Daniel said, before it decides she's one of its own. Mark's breath came too fast. There was no way back. They had to run. But where? And for how long? Because the mark was spreading. And soon, they wouldn't be running from the creature. They'd be running from themselves. The forest held its breath. Mark's fingers dug into Olivia's shoulders. Olivia, talk to me. She didn't blink, didn't move. Then, she smiled. Not Olivia's smile. Something else. Something wrong. A voice slipped from her lips. Low, distorted. Not hers. You shouldn't have run. Mark's blood turned to ice. Jake stepped back. What the hell? Olivia's head tilted slightly, the blackness in her eyes shimmering. Her mouth opened again, but she wasn't the one speaking. You were always meant to stay. Daniel grabbed his knife. That's not Olivia anymore. Mark shoved him back. Don't touch her. Daniel's grip tightened on the blade. If you wait too long, she won't come back. Mark's pulse thundered. She's still in there. Olivia's lips curled. Are you sure? Then she lunged. Her movements weren't human. Too fast. Too smooth. Mark barely dodged before her claws swiped past his throat. Jake shouted, She's changing. Mark turned back, and his stomach dropped. Olivia wasn't breathing, not normally. Her chest rose and fell in slow, shallow movements. Her fingers twitched, stretched. Daniel's voice was sharp. She's almost gone. Mark refused to believe that. He grabbed her shoulders again. Olivia, you can fight this. For a second, just a second, her body tensed. The darkness in her flickered. Then she gasped. A sharp, desperate sound like someone drowning. Her eyes flickered. The blackness shrank slightly. Mark. Her voice was her own again. Weak. Frantic. It's inside me. It wants you. Then she screamed. The noise wasn't human, and from the darkness of the trees, something answered. A long, hollow click. Mark's breath caught. The creature was right there, watching, waiting, because it knew. Olivia wasn't its prey anymore. She was becoming part of it. Olivia's scream cut through the trees, a raw, distorted sound that wasn't entirely human. Her body convulsed, fingers twitching, black veins creeping up her neck. Mark refused to let go. Fight it, Olivia. You're stronger than this. She gasped, eyes flickering between human and something else. The blackness still pulsed beneath her skin, but her expression, her fear, was real. Jake stood frozen, gripping the rusted knife Daniel had given him. His knuckles were white. If she fully turns, Mark snapped at him. She's not turning. Daniel wasn't convinced. His grip on his own knife tightened. She's already halfway gone. If you wait too long, we lose our chance. Mark's breath came in sharp bursts. He wouldn't let it happen. Then, a sound. A deep, guttural click. The creature was close. Jake turned sharply. It's watching us. Mark looked at Olivia, her trembling hands, her labored breathing, her skin turning too pale. Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. If you want to save her, do it now. Mark made his choice. He wasn't leaving her behind. The ritual of reclamation. Daniel moved fast, dragging Mark and Olivia toward a clearing. The ground was covered in twisted symbols, carved deep into the dirt. Mark's pulse pounded. What the hell is this? Daniel didn't look up. The only way to pull her back. Jake hesitated. You mean a ritual? Daniel nodded. I saw it once. A group tried to save someone before. They failed. Mark clenched his jaw. We won't. Daniel exhaled sharply. Then do exactly what I say. They placed Olivia at the center of the carvings. She shuddered violently. The blackness in her veins pulsed, moving faster, crawling toward her face. Daniel pulled out a jagged stone knife. Mark immediately blocked him. What the hell are you doing? Daniel's voice was grim. The infection is inside her. We have to force it out. Jake stepped forward. How? Daniel's grip tightened on the blade. Blood. Mark's breath hitched. No, there has to be another way. Daniel cut Olivia's palm. The blood that spilled wasn't red. It was black. Mark's stomach dropped. Then the forest roared to life. The creature let out a piercing guttural shriek. The symbols in the dirt began to burn, and Olivia's body arched violently, screaming. Because whatever had infected her was fighting back. Olivia's body convulsed violently, her scream raw and inhuman. The black veins beneath her skin shifted, pulsing as if alive. Mark held her down. Stay with me, Olivia. The symbols in the dirt burned brighter, flickering with an eerie, unnatural glow. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Then the ground shook. Jake whirled toward the trees. It's coming. A deep, guttural click echoed from the forest. Closer, louder. The creature was no longer watching. It was coming for her. Daniel pressed the jagged blade deeper into Olivia's palm. More blackened blood spilled onto the symbols. Olivia screamed. Again. Her body arched, twisting. Then the whispers started. Not from Olivia. From everywhere. 1,000 voices murmuring from the shadows, from the trees, from the deepest parts of the forest. Jake stepped back. What the hell is that? Daniel's face was pale. It doesn't want to let her go. Mark's grip on Olivia tightened. I don't care what it wants. The whispering grew louder. The black veins on Olivia's arms began retreating, slowly pulling back. Then, a screech. Mark's head snapped up. Through the trees, it appeared. Tall, twisted, hollow eyes fixed on Olivia. It opened its mouth. A sound, not a roar, not a scream. Something deeper. Something that made Mark's skin crawl. Daniel's voice was sharp. We're out of time. The creature lunged. Mark made his choice. He grabbed the blade from Daniel's hands and slashed his own palm. His blood mixed with Olivia's on the burning symbols. The whispering stopped. The air rippled, and Olivia gasped. Her body jerked violently, then went still. The blackness in her veins began to dissolve. The creature froze. For the first time, it hesitated. Mark's pulse pounded. It's working. Then Olivia's eyes shot open. Her pupils were normal, human. She was back. But the creature was furious. It let out a roar that shook the entire forest. Jake pulled Mark to his feet. We need to move, now. The forest exploded into chaos. Branches snapped. The ground trembled. The creature charged. Mark grabbed Olivia's hand. Run! And they did. Through the burning symbols, through the twisting trees, back toward the road. The creature howled. They didn't stop, didn't look back, because they knew if they did, it would take them all. The forest ripped apart behind them as they ran. The creature was closer than ever. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps as he yanked Olivia forward. Her legs were weak from the ritual, but she pushed on. She had to. Daniel led the way, cutting through the brush with terrifying speed. Jake was right behind him. The distant glint of the road, their car, was barely visible through the trees. They were almost there. Then the clicking started again, deep, resonating. Mark didn't dare look back, but he felt it, the weight of its presence, the wrongness. Then Olivia tripped. She hit the ground hard, a sharp cry escaping her lips. Mark stopped instantly. "Olivia!" Jake skidded to a halt. "Mark, we have to go." Daniel's voice was flat, cold. "If we stop, we all die." Mark didn't care. He yanked Olivia up. "Come on, just a little farther." She was shaking, weak, but she nodded. They ran. Then the trees thinned. The road was right there. Their car, unlocked, waiting. For a moment, Mark thought, "We're going to make it." Then the screech, a rush of air. Mark turned just in time to see the creature leaping right at them. The standoff Jake yanked the driver's door open. "Get in." Daniel shoved past him, diving into the passenger seat. Mark barely managed to pull Olivia into the back before the creature crashed down, right in front of the car. It stood there, massive and twisted, its hollow eyes locked onto them. The clicking grew deafening. Olivia whimpered, "It's not letting us go." Mark's pulse thundered. "Jake, drive." Jake's hands shook as he gripped the wheel. "What if it doesn't move?" Daniel's voice was sharp. "Then we make it move." Jake's foot slammed on the gas. The tires screeched against the wet gravel. The car lurched forward. For a moment, it looked like the creature wouldn't move. Then it vanished. 1 second, it was there. The next, gone. Jake didn't stop. The car tore down the road, tires kicking up water and mud. No one spoke. No one breathed. Mark turned back. The black hill was fading behind them. But deep in the trees, in the fog, something watched, not moving, not following, just waiting. Because now, it knew their names. The car sped down the desolate road, the black hill disappearing into the distance. No one spoke. No one looked back. Mark stared out the window, his pulse still racing. His hands were slick with sweat. The echoes of the creature's screech still lingered in his ears. Olivia sat beside him, her breathing unsteady. Her skin was too pale. The black veins from the infection had faded, but something wasn't right. Jake gripped the steering wheel too tight. His knuckles were white, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, silent. It was over, wasn't it? Then Olivia spoke. "Mark." Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't feel right." Mark turned to her. "What do you mean?" She shivered. "It's still in me." Mark's stomach dropped. Jake stiffened. "That's not possible." We finished the ritual. Daniel exhaled slowly. Maybe not all of it. Silence. Olivia gripped Mark's arm. Her skin was ice cold. Then she whispered, so low, so faint, he almost didn't hear it. It's still watching. Mark's breath caught. Jake let out a nervous chuckle. She's just in shock. We're out, okay? We made it. Then, a noise. A soft, wet clicking. Mark's heart stopped. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. Daniel sat completely still. Then Olivia turned her head, and in the window's reflection, something else stared back at them. Not Olivia. Something taller. Something wrong. The creature's hollow, twisted face grinned, and the clicking grew louder. The car swerved violently as Jake let out a startled curse. What the hell was that? Mark spun toward Olivia. She was shaking, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I saw it, she whispered. In the reflection. It's here. Mark swallowed hard, his pulse pounding. Daniel finally spoke. His voice was flat, controlled. Tell me exactly what you saw. Olivia's eyes darted toward the window. It was me, but not me. Its face. She shook her head violently. It was smiling. Mark felt a cold chill crawl up his spine. Jake forced his breathing to slow. Maybe it's just in your head. We've all been through hell, and then a sharp thump from the roof. Everyone froze. Jake's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Tell me, that was a branch. Silence. Another thump. Something was up there. Daniel reached for his knife. Don't stop the car. Jake's voice was tight. I wasn't planning on it. The air inside the vehicle felt wrong. Heavy, like something was pressing down on them. Then, Olivia stiffened. Her fingers dug into Mark's arm. Her breath hitched. Mark turned to her, and his blood ran cold. Her pupils had dilated, almost too much. Then, she smiled. But it wasn't Olivia's smile. It was too wide. Too wrong. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't hers anymore. Did you really think you could leave? Mark's breath caught. Daniel's knife was in his hand now. Get away from her. But Olivia, or whatever was inside her, laughed. It was a soft, hollow sound. Then, the car flipped. Mark's head throbbed. His body ached. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a sharp ringing in his ears. He blinked. His vision was blurry. Darkness surrounded him, except for the flickering headlights illuminating the wreckage. The car was on its side, deep in the ditch off the road. Rain pattered softly against the shattered windshield. A gurgled cough came from the front seat. Jake. Mark's voice was hoarse, a groan. I'm here. Daniel stirred beside him, blood streaking his forehead. Everyone, okay? Mark tried to move. Pain shot up his ribs, but he ignored it. Then he noticed Olivia's seat was empty. His stomach dropped. Olivia. Mark twisted, ignoring the pain. Olivia. No response. Then the whispering, soft, familiar, coming from the woods. Jake's breathing was ragged. Tell me you hear that. Mark's hands clenched. She's out there. Daniel's voice was grim. Or something wants us to think she is. A shadow moved just beyond the tree line. Mark's chest tightened. He knew that shape. Tall. Wrong. Waiting. Then, Olivia's voice. Mark. But something about it was off. Daniel exhaled slowly. This is a trap. Jake cursed under his breath. What the hell do we do? Mark's jaw tightened. He already knew the answer. We go after her, and deep in the woods. Something smiled. Mark's head throbbed. His body ached. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a sharp ringing in his ears. He blinked. His vision was blurry. Darkness surrounded him, except for the flickering headlights illuminating the wreckage. The car was on its side, deep in the ditch off the road. Rain pattered softly against the shattered windshield. A gurgled cough came from the front seat. Jake, Mark's voice was hoarse, a groan. I'm here. Daniel stirred beside him, blood streaking his forehead. Everyone. Okay. Mark tried to move. Pain shot up his ribs, but he ignored it. Then, he noticed Olivia's seat was empty. His stomach dropped. Olivia. Mark twisted, ignoring the pain. Olivia. No response. Then, the whispering. Soft. Familiar. Coming from the woods. Jake's breathing was ragged. Tell me you hear that. Mark's hands clenched. She's out there. Daniel's voice was grim. Or something wants us to think she is. A shadow moved just beyond the tree line. Mark's chest tightened. He knew that shape. Tall. Wrong. Waiting. Then, Olivia's voice. Mark. But something about it was off. Daniel exhaled slowly. This is a trap. Jake cursed under his breath. What the hell do we do? Mark's jaw tightened. He already knew the answer. We go after her. The rain had stopped, but the whispers hadn't. Mark climbed out of the wreckage, his ribs screaming in protest. He barely felt it. His focus was on the woods, on the darkness between the trees. Olivia. His voice was raw, desperate. No answer. Just the soft rustling of leaves that weren't moving. Daniel stood beside him, gripping his knife. His voice was cold. We don't split up. Jake exhaled shakily. We shouldn't even go in. Mark ignored him. He couldn't leave her. He wouldn't. Then, Olivia's voice. Mark, help me. His breath caught. It was close, but something felt wrong. The voice echoed strangely, like it wasn't coming from just one direction. Jake shuddered. That's not her. Mark's fists clenched. What if it is? Silence. Then, a shadow moved. Not far. just beyond the first row of trees. Mark stepped forward. Daniel's hand shot out. Don't! Mark's pulse pounded. She's in there. Daniel's eyes were hard. And so is it. Whispering grew louder. Then another voice joined in. A voice they weren't expecting. Help me. Mark's blood ran cold. It was his own voice. Coming from the trees. Jake swore under his breath. This place is messing with us. Danielle turned to Mark. Decide. Now. Mark swallowed hard. There was no decision. We go in, and as they stepped into the woods, the trees closed behind them. The moment they stepped past the first row of trees, the forest shifted. Mark felt it first. The air thickened, heavy, suffocating, like stepping into a place that wasn't meant to be walked through. Jake hesitated. Something's wrong. Danielle turned. His jaw tightened. The road was gone. Mark's breath caught. They had just come from there. But now, there was only more forest. Jake swore under his breath. It's messing with us. Daniel's grip on his knife tightened. Stay close. Don't trust your eyes. Mark forced himself to breathe. Focus. Then, Olivia's voice. I'm here. Please. I don't know where I am. Mark broke into a run. Mark. Daniel's voice snapped behind him. But Mark didn't stop. The whispering wrapped around him, pulling him deeper. The trees blurred, shifted. Then he saw her, standing just ahead, bathed in moonlight. Olivia, Mark's voice cracked. She turned. Her face was pale, wide-eyed. Her clothes were soaked in mud, her fingers trembling. Mark, his chest tightened. It's her. It has to be. Jake and Daniel caught up behind him, panting. Daniel's voice was sharp. Don't get close. Mark hesitated. Why? It was Olivia. Then the wind shifted, and the whispering laughed. Mark's stomach dropped, because behind Olivia, something else was moving, and it was wearing her face. Mark's breath hitched. Two Olivias, one standing before them, trembling, the other lingering in the trees, smiling. Jake took a slow step back. What the hell is this? Daniel's knife was already raised. It's testing us. Mark couldn't think. The Olivia in front of him looked real, but the one in the trees, she moved first, stepping closer. Her head tilted unnaturally. Mark, she whispered, you found me. Mark's stomach twisted. The Olivia by the trees. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too hollow. Jake gritted his teeth. That's not her. But then, the first Olivia spoke. Please, it's not me. It's lying. Mark's heart pounded. His mind spun. One of them was real. One of them was not. Daniel's voice was low, deadly. We choose wrong. We die. Mark swallowed hard. His eyes locked onto Olivia's. Then the wind shifted, and one of them blinked the wrong way. Mark's pulse hammered. Both Olivias were watching him, waiting. The wind howled through the trees. The whispering grew louder. One was real, one was not. Daniel's grip on his knife tightened. Jake was tense, sweat dripping down his face. The Olivia closest to Mark took a step forward. "It's me," she whispered. "Please, you know me." The other Olivia moved, too. Her voice cracked with fear. "Mark, don't listen to it. It's trying to trick you." Mark's chest tightened. Then, the wrong blink. The Olivia near the trees had blinked sideways. Mark's blood ran cold. Daniel saw it too. "That's not her." The fake Olivia tilted its head. Then, it dropped the act. A slow, twisting grin stretched across its face, and it whispered, "Are you sure?" Mark hesitated for just a second. Then, the real Olivia screamed. The creature lunged. Its skin ripped apart, stretching, unraveling into something inhuman. And Mark realized he had waited too long. Mark's pulse hammered. Both Olivias were watching him, waiting. The wind howled through the trees. The whispering grew louder. One was real, one was not. Daniel's grip on his knife tightened. Jake was tense, sweat dripping down his face. The Olivia closest to Mark took a step forward. "It's me," she whispered. "Please, you know me." The other Olivia moved, too. Her voice cracked with fear. "Mark, don't listen to it. It's trying to trick you." Mark's chest tightened. Then, the wrong blink. The Olivia near the trees had blinked sideways. Mark's blood ran cold. Daniel saw it too. "That's not her." The fake Olivia tilted its head. Then, it dropped the act. A slow, twisting grin stretched across its face, and it whispered, "Are you sure?" Mark hesitated for just a second. Then, the real Olivia screamed. The creature lunged, its skin ripped apart, stretching, unraveling into something inhuman. And Mark realized he had waited too long. Mark's hands shook. The thing in front of him, it had his face, but it wasn't him. It tilted its head, grinning. "You can't kill me," it whispered. "I am you." Daniel didn't hesitate. He lunged. His knife sliced across its throat. For a moment, nothing. Then, the creature laughed. Its head snapped to the side at an unnatural angle. Its skin split open, peeling back, revealing something writhing beneath. "You're making this fun." Jake grabbed Olivia's wrist. "Run!" But the trees moved again. The path behind them vanished. There was no escape. Daniel clenched his jaw. No more running. Mark's breath came in ragged gasps. He gripped a fallen branch, his knuckles white. If they were going to die, they'd die fighting. The creature stopped laughing. It lunged. Mark swung first. Mark's swing connected. The branch snapped in half. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it grinned wider. Its hollow eyes locked onto him, mocking. Daniel struck next. Fast, precise. His knife plunged deep into the creature's chest. A normal thing would have died, but this wasn't normal. The wound rippled. Flesh knit itself back together. It was healing. Jake cursed. This thing won't die. The creature's grin stretched. Neither will you, it whispered. Then it changed. Its body twisted, limbs cracking, elongating, unraveling into something no longer human. And its face, it wasn't Mark's anymore. It was Olivia's. Mark's stomach dropped. The creature charged. Olivia's scream rang through the trees, and the black hill closed in. The thing wearing Olivia's face charged. Daniel shoved him aside, knife raised. But the creature was faster. It slammed into him, sending him sprawling into the mud. "Daniel!" Jake shouted. Daniel gasped, clutching his chest. His knife was gone, ripped from his hands. The creature loomed over him, its twisted version of Olivia's face smiling. "Stay," it whispered. "The forest wants you." Then it reached for him. Mark's mind screamed, "Move," but his body wouldn't, because something else was wrong. The trees weren't just shifting anymore. They were watching, changing. Mark felt it, something cold crawling under his skin, sinking into his bones. Jake fell to his knees, gripping his head. "Do you feel that?" Olivia's breath hitched. It's inside me." Mark's fingers dug into the dirt. The black hill wasn't just trapping them. It was becoming them. And if they didn't escape soon, they wouldn't be leaving as themselves, like something was crawling underneath it. Jake clutched his arms, his breathing ragged. "It's in me. I feel it moving." Daniel was still on the ground, chest heaving. His eyes were different, darker. And Olivia, she was shaking. Mark stepped toward her, then stopped, because her shadow was wrong. It stretched unnaturally across the ground, twisting, writhing, not moving with her, moving on its own. Mark's stomach tightened. "We're changing," Olivia whispered. "It's too late." "No," Daniel growled. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself up. "We fight it." "But how?" Jake's voice cracked. "How do you fight something inside you?" The wind shifted, and the whispering grew louder. Mark felt it now. The Black Hill wasn't letting go. It was claiming them. If they didn't find a way out now, they wouldn't be leaving at all, like something was crawling underneath it. Jake clutched his arms, his breathing ragged. "It's in me. I feel it moving." Daniel was still on the ground, chest heaving. His eyes were different, darker. And Olivia, she was shaking. Mark stepped toward her, then stopped, because her shadow was wrong. It stretched unnaturally across the ground, twisting, writhing, not moving with her, moving on its own. Mark's stomach tightened. "We're changing," Olivia whispered. It's too late. No, Daniel growled. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself up. We fight it. But how? Jake's voice cracked. How do you fight something inside you? The wind shifted, and the whispering grew louder. Mark felt it now. The Black Hill wasn't letting go. It was claiming them. If they didn't find a way out now, they wouldn't be leaving at all. Mark's breath hitched. The four figures stood in their way, twisted versions of themselves, smiling, waiting. Mark stared at his own face. The other him tilted its head, mocking. You're not real, Mark whispered. The other Mark laughed. Aren't we? Then they attacked. Daniel met himself first, knives flashing in the moonlight. The two clashed, brutal and fast, identical in skill. Jake dodged his own distorted mirror, barely avoiding a strike that would have torn his throat open. And Olivia, her copy didn't attack. It just watched, smiling, like it knew something she didn't. Mark swung his broken branch at his double. The impact should have shattered its skull. But the other Mark caught it, effortless, strong. Mark's stomach dropped. His double leaned close, whispering in his ear, You already lost. Mark's vision blurred, his skin burned. Because the Black Hill wasn't just testing them, it was choosing, and only one Mark would leave. Mark's vision blurred, his head throbbed. The other him wasn't backing down. Neither was Jake's double or Daniel's, but Olivia's copy. It just stood there, smiling, waiting. Daniel growled, swinging his knife again. Too slow. His double dodged effortlessly. Jake was already bleeding, his clone unscathed. Mark staggered back. His double didn't look tired, didn't look wounded, because the Black Hill wasn't playing fair. It was pushing them, breaking them, making them weaker. Mark's pulse hammered. Then his double moved, faster than it should, too fast. A hand slammed against Mark's chest, and suddenly he couldn't move. His body locked in place. Jake cried out, I can't. His hands were frozen mid-swing, paralyzed. Daniel struggled, but his knife slipped from his fingers. Mark's mind screamed, because now only Olivia could move, and her double was still smiling. Choose. Her own voice speaking to her. The Black Hill wasn't letting all of them go, just one version, and Olivia had to decide. Olivia's chest tightened. Her friends were frozen in place. Mark's eyes flicked to hers, wide with panic. Jake's breathing was shaky. Daniel's hands twitched like he was still trying to fight. And in front of her, her own copy, still smiling, waiting. Choose. The word slithered from her double's lips. The forest around her darkened, thickened. The Black Hill was watching, waiting for her answer. Her hands shook. I don't understand. The other Olivia stepped closer. Yes, you do. She did. One version of them was leaving. The others, the forest would keep. Her stomach turned. I won't choose. The other Olivia tilted her head. Then no one leaves. A gust of wind ripped through the trees. The shadows coiled tighter around Mark, Jake, and Daniel. Their bodies were starting to sink, like the forest was swallowing them whole. No, Olivia's voice cracked. She had to stop this. She had to decide. Who stays? Who escapes? She had seconds left, and the Black Hill was waiting. Olivia's heart pounded. The Black Hill's grip tightened around Mark, Jake, and Daniel. The ground was swallowing them. Their eyes desperate, bleeding. Her double waited, smiling, unmoving. Choose. Olivia's breath shook. She looked at Mark, his jaw clenched, but his eyes full of fear. Jake's hands grasped at the dirt, trying to fight. Daniel, his lips moved. A whisper. Don't choose me. Her stomach twisted. How could she choose? Her fingers curled into fists. Take me instead. The forest stilled. For a moment, silence. Then, her double laughed. Low, mocking. Olivia's breath hitched. That's not how this works. The wind howled. The ground pulled harder. Mark sank deeper. Jake gasped. Daniel's fingers clawed at the mud. Time was running out. She had to say a name. One of them had to stay, or all of them would. Her lips parted, and she whispered a name, and the Black Hill accepted her choice. A name left Olivia's lips. The wind stopped. The forest exhaled. Then the ground released them. Mark, Jake, and Olivia collapsed onto solid earth, gasping. The suffocating force around them was gone. But Daniel wasn't there. Olivia's breath hitched. No. She scrambled to her feet, eyes scanning the shifting fog. He had been right there. Daniel. Mark's voice cracked. He spun in circles. Nothing. Jake stumbled forward, shaking. Where is he? Where? A shadow moved in the trees. A figure stood there. Daniel. His eyes empty, his body motionless. Like he was part of the forest now. A whisper curled through the air. Not Daniel's voice. The forest speaking through him. You chose well. Then he turned and walked into the mist, and the Black Hill swallowed him whole. Mark's chest heaved. His legs burned as they ran. Jake stumbled beside him, his breath ragged. Olivia hadn't spoken since Daniel disappeared. They shouldn't have made it out. But the forest let them go. Why? The trees thinned. The fog lifted. The road appeared. Their car still there. Mark nearly collapsed against it. His hands shook as he fumbled for the keys. Behind them, the Black Hill loomed, silent, watching. They had escaped. So why did it still feel like they hadn't? Jake sank into the back seat, staring blankly at the dashboard. Olivia sat rigid, her knuckles white. Mark started the engine. The tires skidded against the dirt. They drove. No one spoke, because deep down they all felt it. Daniel wasn't gone. Not really. And the Black Hill wasn't finished with them. The motel room was silent. Mark sat on the bed, staring at his hands. They were still shaking. Jake stood by the window, staring out into the darkness. Not speaking, not moving. Olivia sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. No one had said a word since they left the forest, because something was wrong. The air felt thick, like the Black Hill was still watching. Mark exhaled shakily and pulled out his phone. No service. A chill ran through him. They had service earlier. Jake turned from the window, his face pale. The trees. Mark frowned. What? Jake's breath hitched. He pointed outside. Mark followed his gaze, and his blood ran cold. Outside, just beyond the parking lot, a forest stood. Tall, blackened trees. Wrong. Twisted. The Black Hill. It had followed them. And then, a knock at the door. Slow, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. Mark's stomach dropped. They weren't alone. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the motel room. Slow, measured. No one moved. Mark's pulse thundered. He looked at Olivia, her face pale. Jake took a shaky step back. We don't open it. Knock, knock. A deep, rasping breath from the other side. Mark swallowed hard. Who's there? Silence. Then, a whisper. You left me. Mark's breath caught. Daniel. Olivia's hands covered her mouth. Jake shook his head, his eyes wild. This isn't real, Jake whispered. It can't be. Mark's stomach twisted. His hand hovered over the door handle. No, he shouldn't. He looked through the peephole. A shadow stood outside, tall, unmoving. Not quite Daniel. Not quite human. Knock. Let me in. Mark's body froze, because Daniel's voice was inside the room now, right behind them. Mark's breath hitched. The voice had come from inside the room, but no one else was there. Olivia was shaking. Jake's back was pressed against the wall, eyes wide with terror. Mark turned, his chest tightening. The air felt wrong, heavy, unnatural. Then, a flicker, a shadow near the bathroom. Shifting, moving. Something was standing there, watching. Mark's fingers curled into a fist. Daniel. Silence. Then, a step forward. The light flickered, and they saw him. Daniel. Or something that looked like him. His skin was too pale, his eyes too dark, his lips curled into a too wide grin. Olivia let out a sharp breath. That's not him. Daniel's head tilted, his mouth open. Too wide. You left me. Jake grabbed Mark's arm. We need to get out. Now. But Mark couldn't move, because deep down, he knew the truth. They didn't leave Daniel behind. They brought something else with them. And now, it was never going to let them go. Mark's pulse thundered. Jake yanked his arm. move, but Mark's feet felt glued to the floor. His eyes locked on Daniel, or the thing wearing his face. It smiled wider. Mark's stomach churned. That wasn't human. Olivia shoved him. Go. That snapped him out of it. They bolted. Jake threw the door open, only to freeze. The motel hallway was gone. In its place, a forest, tall blackened trees, twisting, watching, the black hill. Jake stumbled back. No, we left. Mark turned. The motel room was disappearing. The walls cracked apart. The ceiling melted into fog, and Daniel's laughter echoed around them. Low, distorted. Mark's breath came in short gasps. We never left, did we? Olivia shook her head, eyes wide. Jake let out a ragged sob. The Black Hill never let them go. And now, it never would. The motel crumbled into mist. The walls peeled away, revealing towering trees, dark, endless. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. They were back. Jake's breath hitched. This isn't real. Olivia clutched her head. We left. I saw the road. I saw laughter. Low, twisting. Daniel's voice. But not Daniel. Mark turned, his stomach tightening. Daniel, or the thing pretending to be him, stood just beyond the trees. You never left. The words sank into Mark's skull like ice. Olivia shook her head violently. No, we escaped. We drove away. Daniel's smile widened. Did you? Mark's body went cold. Memories flashed. The car, the road, the motel. But now, as he thought about it, he couldn't remember actually leaving. The drive, a blur. The motel. Did it even exist? Mark's breath came in shaky gasps. This whole time, Jake whispered it. We never left the Black Hill. The shadows closed in. The forest breathed, and the Black Hill took them again. Darkness swallowed them. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. The trees stretched higher, twisting unnaturally, their bark pulsing like something alive. Jake let out a shaky breath. This can't be happening. Olivia gritted her teeth. There has to be a way out. But deep down, Mark knew there was no escape, because Daniel had told them the truth. You never left. And now, Mark finally understood why. They had died here. That night, the moment they entered the Black Hill, it had taken them. Everything after, the motel, the road, the car, it was all a lie. A trick to keep them here. Jake let out a choked sob. No, I'm alive. I can feel my heart beating. A deep, guttural whisper slithered through the air. You are not alive. Mark's breath hitched. The faceless figures closed in. Their whispers crawled through the air, slithering into his mind, stealing his thoughts. Jake stumbled back. I can't think. I can't. Olivia clutched her head. They're taking Us, Mark fought to hold on, to remember his name, his past, his life. But it was fading, slipping away. The black hill was consuming them. And then Daniel stepped forward, or what was left of him. His hollow eyes locked onto Mark, his voice a whisper. "You can still run." Mark's pulse hammered. "How? We? You're not dead yet." Daniel's grin widened. "But you will be soon." Mark felt it. The pull. The black hill, sinking its roots into his soul. One last chance. One last choice. Stay. Be forgotten. Or fight. Mark's jaw tightened. He looked at Jake, at Olivia. "We run. Now." They didn't question him. They ran into the dark, into the unknown, because the black hill wanted them erased. But Mark wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. Mark's lungs burned. The trees blurred past. The whispers grew louder, curling around his mind like fingers pulling him back. "Don't run. Stay. Forget." Jake tripped, crashing into the mud. I can't." Mark grabbed him. "Yes, you can." Olivia was ahead, her breath ragged. "I see something. A light. A way out." Mark's pulse pounded. Was it real? Or another trick? Behind them, the forest shifted. Figures moved in the mist. Daniel's voice, broken, distorted. "You can't leave. It's too late." Olivia screamed. "Run." Mark didn't look back. The trees trembled. The ground split apart. The black hill was collapsing, folding in on itself. The light grew closer. Jake gasped. Almost there. The whispers turned into screams. Hands reached from the shadows. Cold fingers brushed Mark's skin. Then they broke through. Blinding light swallowed them. And suddenly, the forest was gone. Blinding light. Then, silence. Mark gasped as his body hit cold, wet ground. His lungs burned, his legs aching. He was out. Jake lay beside him, coughing. Olivia staggered to her feet, looking around in disbelief. They were on a road, an actual road. The black hill was gone. Mark's chest heaved. We made it. Olivia turned in a slow circle. The night air was still. No mist, no whispers. Jake let out a broken laugh. "It's over. It's really over." Mark wanted to believe it, but deep down something felt wrong, too easy, too simple. A car's headlights appeared in the distance. Mark stepped forward, waving. "Hey, over here." The car slowed, then stopped. Mark's breath hitched. The driver's window rolled down, and Daniel stared back at him, smiling. "I told you," he whispered. "You never left." Mark's blood ran cold. Daniel sat calmly in the driver's seat, his face just as they remembered. But his eyes, they weren't right. Too dark, too deep. Jake's voice shook. This isn't real." Daniel's smile widened. "Isn't it?" Mark stumbled back. The air felt thick, heavy. The road beneath them rippled like water. The headlights flickered. Then the forest returned. The trees twisted up around them, the road melting into mist. The truth crashed down. They never escaped. The Black Hill had only let them think they did. Olivia clutched her head. No, we were out. We saw the road. Daniel's head tilted. You saw what it wanted you to see. Jake's breath came fast. Why? Why do this to us? Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. Because you belong here now. Mark's stomach twisted. The trees closed in. And then, Daniel's face began to change. His skin darkened, cracking. His mouth stretched, splitting open. And his eyes, they weren't human anymore. They never had been. Mark couldn't move, because deep down, he knew the truth. They were never leaving. Not now. Not ever. Mark's mind screamed. The forest wrapped around them, swallowing the road, the sky, everything. Daniel's twisted, inhuman face grinned in the dim light. His voice was no longer his own. You never escaped, because you were never meant to. Jake staggered back. No, I don't believe this. Olivia's breath came in shaky gasps. This is a nightmare. It has to be. But Mark knew the truth now. It wasn't a nightmare. It was a memory. Flashes of the past hit him. Them hiking, laughing, stepping into the forest. The whispers starting. Something pulling them in. And then, darkness. His body went cold. They had died that night. The Black Hill hadn't just trapped them. It had taken them. And everything since then, the motel, the car, the road, it was all a trick. A cruel, endless loop. Jake shook his head violently. No, we're alive. We can feel. We can think. Daniel's smile widened. For now, the forest shuddered. The shadows deepened. And Mark realized they were fading. The longer they stayed, the more they lost, until there would be nothing left of them at all, and the Black Hill would have them forever. Mark's hands trembled. His skin felt wrong, lighter, thinner, like he was vanishing. Jake stumbled, gripping his arms. I can't feel my fingers. Olivia let out a shaky breath. We have to fight. Daniel, or what was left of him, laughed softly. Fight? How do you fight something that owns you? The shadows twisted. The trees moved closer. Mark's heartbeat pounded. His mind raced. Then he remembered. The fire, the only thing the Black Hill had ever feared. Jake's voice was weak. Mark. Mark's eyes snapped up. We burn it. Olivia's eyes widened. The forest. Jake's breath caught. Are you insane? This thing isn't real. It's... Mark grabbed a branch, snapped it. Dry wood. Real. We have one chance, Mark whispered. If we burn it, we break it. Daniel's grin vanished, and for the first time, he looked afraid. They had found the Black Hill's weakness. And now they were going to use it. For now, the forest shuddered, the shadows deepened, and Mark realized they were fading. The longer they stayed, the more they lost, until there would be nothing left of them at all, and the Black Hill would have them forever. Mark's hands shook as he struck the lighter. A small flame flickered in the darkness. Daniel's voice twisted into something unnatural. Don't. The trees groaned. The air grew heavy. Jake's breath came fast. Do it, Mark. Mark dropped the flame onto the dry wood. Whoosh. Fire erupted. The Black Hill screamed. The trees twisted violently, thrashing. Shadows burst apart. The mist melted away. Daniel's form flickered. His smile cracked. No. The ground shook. The world split open. Mark, Jake, and Olivia ran. Branches collapsed. The sky ripped apart. The Black Hill was dying. Jake stumbled, gasping. It's working. Olivia grabbed his arm. Keep moving. The fire spread fast. The whispers turned to shrieks. Daniel's body crumbled to ash. His last words, "You'll never leave." Then light, blinding, consuming, and everything was gone. Mark's eyes snapped open. Cold air rushed into his lungs. He gasped, then choked. His body felt heavy, weak. The sky above him was gray. The scent of burnt wood filled his nose. Jake coughed beside him. What happened? Olivia groaned, sitting up. Her hands were covered in ash. The Black Hill was gone. The trees, charred skeletons. The mist vanished. Mark's heart pounded. We did it. Jake's voice shook. Are we really out? Silence. No whispers. No shadows. Just the crackle of dying embers. Then a sound. A car. Mark turned. A road. A real one. Headlights approached. A figure stepped out. A ranger. His eyes widened. My God, we thought you were dead. Mark's stomach twisted. How long had they been gone? Jake looked at Olivia. Olivia looked at Mark. And for the first time, they truly wondered, what had they brought back with them? The fire spread fast. The whispers turned to shrieks. Daniel's body crumbled to ash. His last words, "You'll never leave." Then, light, blinding, consuming, and everything was gone. Mark staggered as the ranger led them toward his truck. His body still felt off. Too light, too distant. Jake pressed a hand to his head. How long? How long have we been missing? The ranger's face darkened. 5 weeks. Silence. Mark's stomach twisted. 5 weeks. That was impossible. They had only been inside the Black Hill for a few days, hadn't they? Olivia clutched her arms, shivering. No, that's not right. The ranger sighed. We sent search teams. Found your car a month ago. Figured you were dead. But now, he shook his head. You don't look like people who've been out here for 5 weeks, Mark. didn't answer because he wasn't sure if they had been missing for 5 weeks or if they had ever really come back at all. Jake tensed. Guys, they turned. The Black Hill was gone, but something watched from the tree line. A shape. Shadow. Olivia's breath hitched. No. Mark's hands went ice cold. The Black Hill had let them go, but it hadn't let them go empty-handed. Something had come back with them. Something wrong. Something that would never leave. Mark sat on his bed, staring at the window. It had been 2 weeks since they were found. 2 weeks of news reports, medical tests, and unanswered questions. 2 weeks of pretending they were fine. But Mark wasn't fine. At night, he heard it. The whispers, soft, distant. But there, Jake had stopped answering his calls. Olivia wouldn't talk about what happened because they all knew they had left the Black Hill. But the Black Hill had never left them. A notification buzzed on his phone. A message from Olivia. Jake is missing. Mark's breath caught. His pulse pounded. He turned toward the window. Outside, in the darkness, a figure stood beneath the streetlight, watching, waiting. The Black Hill wasn't done with them, and this time there would be no escape.